Good morning. Today's talk is about how all religions are based in ecosystems. So let's just start with the biggie, in America and the Western world, the Judeo-Christian religion. So the Judeo-Christian religion, where was that born? We all know where that was born. That was born in the Middle East. In the context of ancient Sumer and the development of civilization in the Middle East. So in a lot of ways, it's one of the oldest religions, although it can be argued that the Chinese religions are even older, or about the same age, and the Indian religions are about the same age. And then there's also evidence coming out that the Aztec religions were pretty old. They weren't as quite as young as they thought they were. The civilizations were pretty bigger and more advanced for a longer period of time than they thought. But if you think about the ecosystem, so what ecosystem did the Judeo-Christian religion evolve from? It evolved from an ecosystem that was basically a harsh desert. So, and prior to the Judeo-Christian peoples, there were, the Sumerians and the Fertile Valley peoples. And those peoples were in a different ecosystem. So the ecosystem of the fertile valleys of the Middle East were just that. They were fertile valleys where you could live a sedentary life and, begin with the advent of agriculture, begin, an abundant civilization without having to move around and fight a lot and gain a lot of territory. So what happens it's Joseph Campbell calls it the Great Reversal, and it happened about 1500 from 2500 BC to 1500 BC. Prior to that, the religious cultures of the Middle East were the Fertile Valley cultures of the Middle East, and they were goddess cultures. They were cultures that worshipped the fertile earth. So this is what most people don't realize. When people get up in arms about their religion versus the other religion, how the goddess religions are just garbage or whatever. Well, obviously you're defending your religion as the right religion, but the goddess religions are interchangeable with living in an ecosystem that is very abundant and provides for your needs. But in contrast to that, you have the Semites and the Aryans, which are very different than the Aryans that most people think of. The Aryan races that were in that area at the time, they were herder and warrior people. So, and why are they herder and warrior people? Is because their landscape is pretty unforgiving, and they're moving around a lot with herds of animals, constantly coming in conflict with other communities of people. And so therefore, what happens is they evolve a god who's a warrior god. And he's not only a warrior god, he's a warrior god, and he's a man, because the warrior in the biological makeup of mammals, the male is the dominant fighter. So these warrior cultures, because they're herding and they're fighting and they're killing and they're coming in conflict a lot, they develop a masculine god. That masculine god sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. They develop a masculine god. So in the context of this harsh natural environment, so you're not looking to nature to provide for you. So you don't worship nature. Instead, you worship the masculine deity that's outside of nature and that shines favor on your group. So you move from a worship of the natural surrounding that's providing for you to an outside alien god who shines, and this is the key, shines exclusively on your group of people. He doesn't shine on the earth. He doesn't shine on everyone. It doesn't honor the cycles of life and death that are occurring everywhere. He only recognizes your tribe as the tribe. So that is the fundamental flaw in the Judeo-Christian-Islamic way of thought. This idea, so what happens is you have a religious context in which, when you're part of one of these groups, in the case of the in the Jewish tradition, it's genetic, it's cultural, it's, you're part of the tribe, like literally part of the tribe. And then in the Christian, it's a creed that you adopt that through your faith you become part of the tribe. But the fundamental flaw is that you've taken a universal worship of the ground of being, which came in the fertile valleys before us, this idea that nature can provide for us, and replace it with a warrior thunder god who favors your people and gives you permission. This is the key. This is why the wars are so intense in the Middle East. Your God gives you permission to promote your people or your creed over others. It's been this way for, the better part of 4,000 years in the Middle East, spreading out through the world. Now, you could say that that's actually the right way to be because it worked, right? You took this warrior ethos and spread it out across the world and obliterated all the other cultures that existed around the world in favor of your own. Well, not all, but you've been on a strong march to try to do that. I think that's more prevalent in the Christian and the Muslim religions, where they're trying to spread their faith out into the world. So this talk started as the ecosystem roots of religion, but it's more becoming a critique of the Judeo-Christian-Islamic idea of exclusivity, of my warrior God exclusively honors my warrior people in opposition to yours. Now, in America and in the West, that's kind of all we know. We don't really understand that there's another way to look at the world. And we think because we're so technologically advanced that that's the right way to be. And, I would challenge you to humble yourself and realize that that's not the right way to be. It serves its purpose. It's actually created a lot of, basically the technological advancement that we've seen. So you have these warrior tribes. They came in and they overthrew over, many hundreds of years. They overthrew the Fertile Valley religions and then replaced, especially in the Middle East, they replaced all of the gods with their male warrior gods. They displace all of the female gods, the goddesses, and create the male warrior god as the primary entity. But you have to also realize that what does that create? That creates a culture which is in constant battle with anyone else who does not hold the faith, who does not believe the same creed or come from the same tribe. You're either one of the chosen people by birth, or you're one of the chosen people by being indoctrinated into the system. And that's the fundamental. If we want the world to work for everyone, like that's what I believe we need to have. We need to be working towards. It seems like I never thought I would see it in my lifetime, that people actually thinking it doesn't matter whether it works for the rest of the world. It's more important that just Americans thrive. Everybody else can just go bite the dust. So, gonna take a little breath break here. All right, so the ecosystem base of religion, of all religion, and then also the critique of the warrior desert religions of the Middle East. So with these warrior desert religions of the Middle East, another thing that is important to realize is that they are born of a desert. And if you look around the earth today, what you see is the ecosystems of the earth being decimated. So I guess this talk is for my environmentalist friends. And I don't want you to, so I guess what I want to say is you got to wake up. You got to wake up and see the root of this thing. It's not technology. It's not overpopulation. It's not the human nature. What it is it's culture. It's a religious culture that started, well, to be fair, that's not all it is. You know, there is definitely examples of non-warrior cultures, non-fertility cultures, non-goddess cultures, or goddess cultures and fertility cultures that did do damage to their ecosystems. But there's also a lot of evidence that suggests that when you have a culture that honors the cycles of life, that honors that is born of an environment in which, you know, nature provides, in a forest ecosystem or a savanna ecosystem, something that's much more abundant, you develop a reverence for that abundance. So that's kind of the key here. The key would be, the nugget of this talk is coming here now at this point. The Judeo-Christian-Islamic traditions were born of a scarcity. They were born of a biological, scarcity of resources. So what inherently they cast forward into the world unconsciously as they're spreading themselves is a scarcity, is a pillaging of whatever resources are there, all in favor of holding up one group versus another, which then leads to war. And we all think, or not we all, but many think that, oh, that's inevitable. That's the human nature. That's the way it's going to be. And there may be a little bit of truth in it, but it's only a partial truth. The cultural context. Culture matters. Context and culture matter most. So we got to wake up and realize that there's something off in our culture. It's a broken culture. I mean, it's not broken. It's served its time. It's had its place in history. What it was meant to do. I mean, I don't know if it was meant to do that, but what it did do was take us out of just bring us into the technological age. That's pretty much what it did. It brought us into the technological age. And it wasn't just those cultures, but it was those cultures mixed with a lot of other things. I know a lot of people, the Jordan Petersons of the world like to argue that it was simply because of Judeo-Christian culture and religion that we had the Enlightenment, and I just don't see any evidence for that. I mean, I'm sure there's some evidence for that, but more. Well, I can't say that there's no evidence for that. I think we have to take a hard look. That's a big assumption. That's discounting a lot of influences, like the influence of the Celtic culture, the highly individualistic Celtic culture that came before the Christian culture and was filtered through the Christian culture as it started to dominate the continent. So at the ecosystem base of these Middle Eastern religions, you've got a warrior desert religion that's basically turning the whole planet into a desert war zone. You know, I mean, if you think about it, like, what are we constantly seeing on the news? You know, the Middle East is in another desert war. You know, and what do we see in Hollywood too? Like, even in Star Wars, you see desert warfare, like Tatooine is a desert planet, and Arrakis and Dune is another desert planet. So it's these stark desert environments that have captured our imagination, and it's all unconscious. It's all beneath the surface. So we don't know that we're unconsciously creating war and desertification from this cultural religious context that's been spreading throughout the world. Now, as that's been happening, there has been a counter movement, which is, you know, people waking up and starting to see the beauty of the ecosystems that we live in, and then wanting to reground themselves in those ecosystems. You know, I recently heard about some of these pro-colonial and anti-indigenous, and you know, it's very interesting to see history start to repeat itself. The manifest destiny that created, that, you know, gave Americans the cultural and religious justification to decimate the Native Americans, and all the, you know, and the Spanish and the Portuguese and everybody, through their religious and cultural ideas, they were given moral privilege, or not moral privilege, moral authority to kill and decimate cultures around the world because they were heathen or pagan. That same idea is rising again, which is really amazing. I mean, it's hard for me to believe, because I'm pretty much studied this stuff most of my life, and just can't understand how people who otherwise are intelligent and good-hearted would now believe that what's right is to spread one ideology around the planet, and at the expense of all others. I just saw somebody I knew who distracted me. So the ecosystem of a desert warrior herder people, that religion, you know, there's something beautiful about that. And, you know, it's so seductive to believe that you are the chosen people. Like, man, doesn't that feel good? Like, I want to feel like the chosen one. Like, that's why I love movies like, you know, Dune, and we all love these heroic adventures where we feel like we're the protagonist and we're going to save the world, some more than others. So you can just join Christianity, or you can join Islam, or you can do a conversion to Judaism, and you can become a chosen one. And you can see why these religions spread around the world, because who wants to be someone who's got a nuanced, compassionate, tolerant view of all people, and respects that everyone has their role, and, you know, is not, and really acknowledges that, you know, we're only part of the puzzle, we're not the answer. But if you adopt these exclusive tribal faith-based religions, I don't want to say faith-based, faith-based is partially faith-based, then you are, it gives you a psychological empowerment. You feel like on top of the world. You still have your problems, but you know that God chose you to do his deeds, and it's his deeds, not her deeds, to do his deeds in the world, and therefore you feel like you can walk, your hand can move, it moves with the hand of God, and you are his chosen one. And that other guy that you don't like, if he's not Christian, so here's the key. If he's not, let's say you're a Christian. If he's not Christian, you can act against him. Now I want to talk a little bit about Christianity. I want to talk a little bit about Jesus. So although Christianity is born of a desert religion, the Christian sect of Judaism. So it was, Christ was a Jew. He wasn't a Christian. And from all historical accounts, he didn't really intend, he had no intention of creating a religion. All he wanted to do was reform Judaism. And what most people also don't realize is that Christianity was born in an era when the dominant belief of the people was that the apocalypse is coming. It's coming now. So what happens in the apocalypse is, the Messiah figure evolves out of the apocalypse culture. And in that culture, the real man Jesus lived and preached what he preached, and then it got turned into a new religion, which was not really his intention, but from all accounts, historical accounts, that wasn't really his intention. But that's what happened. So Jesus. So let's just say it this way, like Jesus was a reformer, right? He wasn't trying to establish a new religion that was going to dominate the world. What he was trying to do was he was trying to reform Judaism because of all the corruption in the temples. In the words of Jesus, what we have in the so-called Bible is something that was codified 400 years after Jesus was alive. Imagine that, 400 years from now. What is that? We're 2025, that'll be 2425. America is only 200 years old, 250 or whatever. So it's kind of ridiculous to think that what was codified 400 years later was actually true to his original intent. Back in that first 400 years, there were so many texts, and they're finding more all the time, that were attributed to his teachings. They're all over the place, man. They're not consistent with what the Bible's narrative is. The only consistency in the Bible is that it was put together by this canon, this 400. So in the year, around the year 400, there was all these priests that got together and decided what they were going to keep in the Bible and what they were going to exclude. And they just left out everything that didn't jive with their particular worldview, which doesn't make it right. It just makes it what those dudes wanted. That's what they wanted. That's what they thought was right. It wasn't what Jesus thought was right. It was what they thought was right. So, in any case, talking about Christianity again and trying to talk a little bit about Jesus. I think the main point I wanted to make about Jesus is that if you study comparative religion, the death and resurrection story is all across many religions. So Jesus' story is not unique. The mythology of Jesus is not unique. But you can't believe that. You can't allow that fact to come in if you're engaged in one of these indoctrinations. So you're basically indoctrinated into a cult that says that the Bible is the Word of God, many Christians, or the Torah, or the Quran, and that this Word of God was divinely inspired. So it's extraterrestrials, alien God came in and possessed the people's hands who were writing it. Had nothing to do with the earth or the world around them. And that your people are exclusively the ones. And that's the rub. That's the thing that is the fatal flaw of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The fatal flaw of those three religions is that each one of them says, my people are the chosen one. You are not. And that is what's going to destroy the world eventually. It takes a long time for these timelines to play out. But now in a global world, we're starting to see all these things bump up against one another. Now, to be fair, every religion thinks, their religion is true and everyone else's religion is wrong. But the difference is that some religions have space in their structure for other forms of belief, for other societal organization styles. But the Middle Eastern ones do not. They only allow for their chosen people, their chosen culture, to be the one. So, if Jesus were alive today, I would say, Jesus would say, well, the thing is Jesus was a Jew. He was a Jewish reformer. So he would say, the greatest teaching of Christianity is love your enemy and love everybody. Like that, agape, like that's the true Christianity, which is a far cry from what we see in modern Christianity these days. Like, how much do you see Christians around the world just loving everyone? Loving the Muslims, loving the pagans, loving the left-wing liberals. Like, where's the love? It's not present. And it's so, I guess I would say maybe there's a way to save Christianity. Maybe this talk should be how to save Christianity. Like, Judaism is more of it's not a evangelical religion. It's just, you're born of the creed. You're either part of the tribe or you're not. They're not trying to go out and convert people to Judaism. They're already their own little enclosed world. But with Christianity, which is based on Judaism, I guess that's the thing. Like, it's an offshoot of Judaism. So it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other. And you have to. I so hope that people start to study the roots of these religions, because it all comes down to sort of what they came from. All of the religious mythological symbolism that you find in Judaism and Islam, those existed prior to Judaism and Islam and Christianity. They all came out of the religions that were already happening in the Middle East, that were born of those civilizations. So in those civilizations, Basically one of the simplest ways to think about it is that the female imagery of the goddess and the birth, the one who gives life, the birther of life, the woman, the womb, the seed, the forest, all of those symbols of life are basically eradicated and replaced with a dude. And it's very important to understand that it's replaced with a dude. It's like we take this, the birth of everything and replace it with a man. Like, life is born of a woman. Life is born of a female body. And you leave that apart. And then so how do they deal with that? They create the mythology of a Virgin Mary. And so the Virgin Mary, the feminine aspect, becomes completely disconnected from the nature cycles. The intercourse and the life and death and the crude nature of everything gets taken out of the mythology and put to the side, or completely decimated and just replaced with a dude. So we take all the feminine aspect, all the nature aspect, all the birth aspect, all the nurturing aspect, all the yin is removed, and you're just left with the yang. And so then you have, what's interesting, what I find is so interesting about Jesus is that in Judaism, you don't have that feminine aspect. It's present in sort of the cultural context of the women who are holding a higher space in the Jewish culture. But in Christianity, you have Jesus, and Jesus is, for all intents and purposes, he is the feminine aspect of Christianity. He is tempering the warrior spirit and making it, and telling us, like, wait a minute, we got to love one another. So that it's very interesting, because you take the nature loving, nurturing, natural element of a mother, you remove that and you put Jesus in that role and say, we need to love everyone. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is something wrong with that. What's wrong with that is that we've removed all empowerment of the nurturing feminine aspect. And if you listen to these dudes talk, and they're all dudes, they're not all dudes, but the most passionate ones are dudes. They talk from a place of which the woman is, they're actually doing it more now, where the female aspect is evil. Like, it has to be contained. I mean, that's why in its extreme form in Islam, they are covered and kept basically kept in their house, so that they can't express their true power. Because, for a man, the power of a woman is terrifying. They hold complete control over us on one level. So it's easier to just design a religion that keeps them caged, basically. And then to convince a large portion of the female population that that's how they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be a subordinate figure to the masculine. And that's the ideology that's returning. Like, the history is repeating itself. And I think it's because, this idea. So I often rail against Jordan Peterson's twisting of good ideas into bad ideas. And one of the things that he twists into a bad idea is this idea of order versus chaos, and he's constantly fighting chaos. But it doesn't work that way. The truth is, there is, light and dark, and they have to interplay with one another. And there is order and chaos, and they have to interplay with one another. And and then the other thing that's kind of strange about that is that there is an order in nature. And it's what the Jordan Petersons of the world do is they put nature into pure chaos. But it's not all chaos. So there's an order to life. So that's, I guess, the better way to say it. There's and it's not even chaos in nature. It's very ordered in nature as well. But without our understanding of it, like we don't know, a volcano, we still don't know when a volcano is going to erupt. We have all kinds of seismic, but that could be considered chaos, and that's nature, right? And then the complex interactions of an ecosystem in the Amazon, that could be seen as chaos because it's so complex, but it is ordered, and it's an order that we can't quite control. So I guess that would be a better way. They don't talk about it that way. They talk about order versus chaos, but what they're talking about is control. They just want to control everything. They don't want anything out of their control, and we all need that. We all need a certain degree of control, but you have to actually have a reverence for the ground of your being. So another way to think about it is, civilization is born, it seems like it's born of the masculine energy, and in a lot of ways it is. But it sits on a bed of feminine birth. The birth of a child is a feminine act. The man contributes his seed, but the woman takes that seed, incubates it, births it, nurtures for it, and cares for it. And that's everywhere in nature. So the civilization, the technologies that we have are all born of nature. So the fundamental flaw, another fundamental flaw in these Middle Eastern religions is the dishonoring of the fundamental ground of being that holds up everything. Nature, the earth, the ecosystems. So I'm going to wrap up because I'm starting to get a little fried here. Still recovering from a concussion. Just don't want to stop making videos. I have to honor my nature, right? So that's something that we have to look at. We don't want too much masculine force, civilization, technology, will, and you don't want too much nurturing, passivity, just go with the flow, yin, femininity. It's the balance between the two, and that is the way of the future. And the sooner we recognize that as a culture, the sooner we're going to stop fighting each other, stop destroying the planet, stop trying to dominate one another and with these forms of fascism and ideological rigidness. And the sooner we can get to the business of creating a thriving civilization and individual lives that are in harmony with one another and with nature. So thanks for listening to that talk. I know it was a little all over the place. It's important, big conversations which are very difficult to explain because there's so many moving parts to it. Anyways, have a great day. Leave comments below. Subscribe if you liked it. Please ask me to clarify. Please tell me to leave stuff out. I'd love to have your feedback. Thank you.